Hi, and welcome to week 4. In this week, we are going to learn about a new class of devices called transistors. We'll narrow down. Transistors is a very wide field. There are lots of electronic devices that are called transistors, but we'll narrow down a field significantly in the next lecture and talk about just one kind of transistor. But in this lecture, I just wanted to introduce you to the idea of transistors as a whole. Okay, one way to think about transistors is to recognize that transistors have basically three ports. Okay, they have an input port and an output port, and the signal and the relationship between the input and output port is determined by a third control port. Okay, think about it in the fluid field or fluid analogy. Think of this valve here, and the flow of the fluid so the fluid flows from the input to the output. Okay, if this gate is completely up, then the fluid can flow completely uninterrupted. It's almost like you have a closed circuit here, and the gate is open, and this just behaves as whatever amount of fluid needs to flows through, right? But if you lower the gate a little bit, let's say you lower the gate and put it till here, and depending on how much you lower the gate, the flow of the fluid is interrupted, right? It's resisted. If the gate is lower, then less fluid will flow. If the gate is more open, more fluid will flow, and so on. Uh, and in the limiting case, if the gate completely blocks the fluid, no fluid flows, right? So in a very similar manner, transistors operate in a very similar manner. So if you have a control signal, and if you have a large control signal, control input to the transistor, a large current will flow through the transistor, almost equivalent to a closed circuit. So the relationship between the input and the output ports is that they are just connected as if it was a closed circuit. Okay, if you reduce the voltage at the control input, then you can imagine the transistor acting as a resistor between the input and the output ports, and this resistance depends on how large is the control voltage that you apply to the port. Okay, so if you apply a very large voltage, then it almost approximates the closed circuit. If you apply a lower voltage, the resistance keeps going high, and in the limiting case the resistance becomes infinite, and you have an open circuit between the input and the output terminals of the transistor. So in this way, what we can see is that depending on what signal you apply to the control port, you are changing the current that is flowing from the input to the output.